and teach everybody else on how to collaborate through a whole of society approach. And this is where you need to be.
Digitization is a reality, and we cannot run away from that. But the first...
Just want to recognize all of you that are here on time. We are grateful. You are welcome. Those of you that are still in the passages that can hear me, we hope you will join us shortly and take your seats. We'd like to start. We're aiming to start in the next 2 minutes just to see who else is going to show up. So that we're able to make the most of the time available to us for this plenary. So thank you to all of you. We're starting in 2 minutes. Just see who else joins us. Thank you. Good morning again. I'll introduce myself now formally. My name is Matshidiso Kgothatso Semela. I work for the Open Government Partnership, and I am the Africa Region Lead for the partnership, working in the support unit. You are all welcome, and I'm very happy to see all of you here in our final plenary of the regional meeting. And as many of you know, the plenary is focusing on scaling up financial transparency and integrity. It really is an honor for me to not only welcome you, but to have Mr. Ruben Lufuka moderate for us. Just to introduce Ruben, many of you know him, I'm sure, or have heard of him. He's a long-standing champion, advocate, and thought leader in driving change for integrity and transparency and anti-corruption. He hails from the wonderful, warm-hearted country of Zambia. And then he's gone on to do great things as a thought leader, not just in Zambia, but in the continent and internationally. Amongst his current and previous luminary hats, he's currently the chairperson of the International Anti-Corruption Commission. He's the country director for Zambia for the Chandler Foundation, and he's also a board member for the Construction Sector Transparency Initiative and former vice chair of Transparency International. So with that introduction, my dear brother, I'm going to hand over to you, and we place ourselves in your capable leadership to moderate the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session. Let me begin by just indicating that improving financial transparency and integrity is essential for public policies that benefit society. When public funds are siphoned off, the consequences are dire. Essential services suffer, and the most vulnerable bear the brunt. While progress has been made in transparency and integrity initiatives, including OGP, more needs to be done. Debt transparency, illicit financial flows, and reforms to the international financial architecture are crucial battlegrounds in this endeavor. Fiscal openness has been a consistently popular policy area among OGP countries. Over 2/3 of active national action plans and 1/4 of local action plans currently include a fiscal openness commitment. Altogether, 111 members have made a total of 756 fiscal openness commitments since OGP was established in 2011. And this is more than nearly any other policy area. Therefore, the purpose for this plenary session is to bring together leaders and members of the OGP community from government, civil society, oversight institutions, multilateral organizations, etc., to interrogate the current challenges, evaluate progress, and discuss strategies to enhance the impact of financial transparency and integrity efforts in the region, particularly in the context of debt transparency and reforms that have been pursued to transform the global financial architecture. I have a very powerful panel of discussants who will make interventions, different interventions on this subject. And I have the privilege of introducing my panel. And I will start with Mr. Epiphany Balo Zoro. Right in the middle, Mr. Zoro, you're very welcome. Mr. Zoro is from Cote d'Ivoire. He is a prominent figure in Ivorian law and politics with a background in civil society, government, parliament, and independent institution. A magistrate by training, he began his career in 1996 as an assistant judge. And in October 2023, he became the president of the High Authority for Good Governance. Mr. Zoro, you are very welcome.
Merci.
I also have the privilege of introducing Madam Caroline Gaita. I have to say it in full. Caroline Gaita, my good sister, is the executive director of Zalendo Trust here in Kenya. She's a governance, communication, and advocacy specialist with demonstrated success in leading and building sustainable programs and strategic leadership in governance, tourism, humanitarian, and development sectors. Carol, you're very welcome. Let me introduce to my immediate left, Honorable Lucy Akelo, who's a member of the Ugandan Parliament representing the Amuru District Women's Constituency. She represents the Forum for Democratic Change Party, is a member of the Human Rights Network Uganda, and is also a member of the Shadow Cabinet, where she is responsible for East African community affairs. Honorable Akelo, you're very welcome. Last, but certainly not the least, is my own brother, Mr. Alvin Mosioma. Alvin is a Global Programs Division Director, Fiscal Justice at Open Societies Foundation. Alvin, in fact, he is now Associate Director, if I got the title correct, unless things have changed. Maybe now you're the President. But Alvin is also a founding Executive Director in his previous role, Executive Director of Tax Justice Network Africa, a Pan-African advocacy and research network of 31 members working in 16 African countries on issues of tax justice and curbing of illicit financial flows from Africa. He's also served as the chair of the Financial Transparency Coalition. And Alvin is a leading voice on African tax policy and has been involved in several civil society campaigns. Alvin, you're very welcome. So the way we've structured this plenary session is as follows, so that we can all have a roadmap. It's designed to run in two parts. So part one will be the scene setting. I will give each of the panelists 4 minutes to respond to the same question, which seeks to provide a foundation for the subsequent discussions that we're going to have. Thereafter, I'll turn to you, the audience, to also participate in creating that foundation. I'll ask for questions and very short interventions. The second part, we'll do a deep dive into what each of the panelists is working on so that we can understand their work around fiscal transparency and their thoughts on how we can move the agenda forward. After that second part, we'll again have a Q&A with you, members of the audience, before I turn to the panelists for their closing remarks. But at the end of the plenary session, we kindly ask that you don't leave immediately. We will have some remarks from Ambassador Thigo, part of the organizing team, and we're going to have a group photo. Unfortunately, for this group photo, you cannot be photoshopped. You have to be here. So we ask you to please be in the room to participate in that event. But let's now go to part one, the scene setting. So debt transparency is crucial for sustainable development. However, African governments continue to confront challenges in ensuring that their borrowing and debt management practices are transparent and accountable to their citizens. We know that the global financial architecture plays an influential role here. My question to you, the panelists, in your view, how is the global financial architecture as it is currently structured negatively impacted or indeed helping financial transparency and integrity in Africa? You have 4 minutes each, and I will start with Caroline Gaita. Well, I mentioned it in the preparatory meeting that I'm a man full of surprises, so Caroline, and since you are part of the host, you set the scene.
Well, Ruben, I didn't see that coming. But good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So in response to the question about, the global financial architecture, let me just start by saying that one of the biggest challenges as a country, and I guess the region that we have faced, is opaqueness around issues of public debt. Rarely do citizens know how much has been borrowed, what the commitments, what the security is. But in terms of the architecture, for us, especially here as a country, the challenge has been too much borrowing without using the resources for what they've been borrowed for. And partly, the institutions that then lend the money to the country exacerbate the situation because we have no way of knowing following the conditions that have been set. And if I go granular to the Kenyan situation, you look at partnerships, for example, with the IMF and other funding institutions, and you find that there are conditions that have been put there, for example, relating to anti-corruption, whether you're talking about a conflict of interest law, whether you're talking about evaluating institutions, evaluating institutions and providing for more entrenched independence of oversight institutions, prudent use of resources, so ensuring that there's accountability, and there's follow-up of borrowing within the limits that are established. But you find that rarely has that been followed. But yet, more resources continue to be given. And so we find ourselves in a situation, for example, 4 years ago, where Kenyans were saying, look, we've had it. You are lending us you're lending the government, not us. You are lending the government a lot of money, and we are telling you there's corruption. But you're not addressing the issues of corruption. In this case, it was in relation to COVID funding. So you're putting lots of good money after bad without asking the tough questions. And so that's been one of the challenges. And very recently, even in the review of Kenya's latest program, you had some conditions that have not been met, and you've seen the government has said, look, it's okay, we don't have to take that final tranche. The last thing I would say is that if you look at, again, using the case of Kenya, you have the grey listing by FATF. And part of it, again, is because a lot of these conditions that were established have not been met, but that has not stopped the country from borrowing. It has not stopped lenders from giving more money. So which means the underlying conditions, the foundations for debt transparency have not been fully met. And as you have rightly put, it then continues to impact public service delivery for citizens. It continues to impact provision of services to those that are most needy, especially for the social services sector, such as education, health, sanitation, and other public-facing sectors. And we continue to see, borrowing from our own experience, how that is directly being impacted by every shilling that we are paying public debt as opposed to spending money on public service delivery. Thank you.
But are you doing anything as CSOs to ensure that these underlying conditions for debt transparency are actually met? Is there anything that CSOs are doing?
Yes, plenty of it. So a part of it, using the Kenyan example, we are currently in the 13th Parliament. So one of the things that we say is good progress is the Parliament currently has a Public Debt and Privatization Committee, which was a first. It has not happened. It's not been there. And this puts focus on issues of borrowing, on issues of debt ceiling, right at the center of Parliament. But as civil society organizations, in addition to engaging these relevant parliamentary committees, there are also advocacy groups. I think Kenya has one of the strongest public debt campaign, the Okoa Uchumi campaign. But within Mzalendo's network, we also have a civil society parliamentary engagement network. And within both networks, there's been a lot of advocacy campaign bringing to the public attention the issues that relate to public debt, the problems, the things that we feel even the multilateral institutions should address. But lastly, is also direct engagement with these bodies. As institutions within the two coalitions, we continue to have meetings with the different lenders. We've continued to input into the reports that they're generating, to review the reports they're generating and give us feedback, including in terms of the diagnostic measures that have been put in place. So we continue to engage, to inform, to create public awareness, and even to do public sensitization campaigns where we engage people in the grassroots to ensure that issues of fiscal transparency and also justice issues relating to public debt are addressed. Thank you.
Great. Since we are still in East Africa, let me turn to Honorable Akello. Let's deal with East Africa, then we'll go to West Africa, and Alvin will wrap it up on this first round. What's your view, Honorable Akello? Kara has just talked about Parliament. So I'm curious to know your views, firstly on the global financial architecture, and I would be interested to know what you're doing in Uganda. Is it on?
Thank you, Robin, and my fellow panelists. Good morning to you all, and greetings from Uganda, the Pearl of Africa, and the land of the Uganda matters. I'm officially Kenyan because I carry the name Akello. I was just given this today, thanks to Alvin. Yeah, I'm coming back to the issues. Well, just like Carol said, this is East Africa, and the issues are more or less the same. In Uganda, before any borrowing is done, it comes to Parliament. But a lot of information usually is missing. And it goes to a committee, which is supposed to scrutinize and come to the general plenary and talk about it. But also before that, I served as the deputy chairperson for an accountability committee called COSASI, Commission, Statutory Authorities, and State Enterprises. And we look into the Auditor General's reports, and I can tell you most of the issues were around the debts that we had as a country. we are actually choking as a country. Unfortunately, you don't feel the money on the ordinary person. Where it goes, you don't know. But I think with also the coming of COVID-19 and the policies of IMF, World Bank, they left everything so open. And many of our countries decided to borrow until, like you can borrow forever. And for us, almost every week we are having a borrowing request before Parliament. So that makes it a bit challenging. And also we are seeing the competition among the big countries, the geopolitics playing along. For example, we're having the Western countries saying, these are the conditions for you to borrow. Long list. And then our president is saying, you're not good, you're not our friends. And then China is coming and saying, we only have 1, 2, 3, so you can borrow. But what are the conditions, the real conditions? I want to give an example. When we were looking at a project of expansion of our airport, the money that we borrowed was from the Exim Bank of China. The workers were from China. The contract was in Chinese. And everything, if we had a problem, the dispute is supposed to be resolved in China. So where does that leave us as Africa? Yes, the money is available, we're picking more, we're getting more debts. Actually, we have more debts than what we have. I've already been warned, I've seen the time is up. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Kello. Mr. Zoro, could I turn to you to get your views on this same question? Mr. Zoro will use French, so I would encourage you to use your gadgets, please.
Merci, merci beaucoup. Alors, votre question, comment est-ce que le cadre législatif au niveau global peut aider ou bien peut être un frein à la question de la transparence financière? Moi, ma réponse est plutôt comment ce cadre législatif aide à renforcer la transparence financière. Et mon exemple va se circonscrire au niveau de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Ce qu'il faut noter, c'est que la Côte d'Ivoire appartient à une zone économique et monétaire qui est l'UEMOA, l'Union économique et monétaire de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Et le cadre de gestion de notre finance publique est harmonisé au niveau des 8 pays membres de l'UEMOA, de cette Union économique et monétaire. Et pour revenir à notre sujet sur la question de la transparence financière, l'un des outils clés qui régit les finances publiques de l'ensemble de nos pays, c'est la directive sur la transparence des finances publiques. C'est une directive qui oriente la gestion financière et budgétaire de l'ensemble des 8 pays membres. Alors, comment la Côte d'Ivoire implémente cette directive? La directive édicte un certain nombre de principes et de valeurs qui coïncident avec les valeurs de l'OGP. Le principe de l'état de droit, le principe de la démocratie, le principe de la transparence et le principe de la responsabilité, plus le principe de la participation citoyenne à la gestion et à la régulation des finances publiques. Alors, comment de façon concrète nous implémentons ces directives? Comment ces directives impactent positivement sur la transparence des finances publiques en Côte d'Ivoire? La première chose qu'il faut noter, c'est que chaque département ministériel est responsable devant le Parlement de la gestion des crédits budgétaires qui lui sont alloués. C'est ce que nous appelons la gestion, le mode de gestion, la gestion en mode budget-programme. Au sein de chaque département ministériel, les gestionnaires de crédit sont clairement identifiés et chaque gestionnaire de crédit, qu'il soit directeur, gestionnaire de programme, chef de service, il est nommé par arrêté du ministre du Budget et des Finances. Et chaque 3 mois, il doit rendre compte de la gestion du crédit qui lui a été alloué, qui est assorti d'un rapport d'activité et d'un rapport de performance. La seconde chose, c'est que les départements ministériels sont responsables chacun en ce qui le concerne devant le Parlement. Et la troisième chose, pour ne pas faire long, la question de l'accès des citoyens est une question également de l'implication des citoyens dans la gestion des finances publiques, est réglementée également par la loi. Si bien que la question du budget citoyen n'est pas une option au niveau du gouvernement, mais c'est une obligation légale de traduire les éléments budgétaires, de traduire toutes les questions des recettes et des dépenses en langage très simple qui permette aux citoyens de s'impliquer, de comprendre et de demander des comptes. Il y a également une autre obligation en matière de transparence financière qui pèse sur les gestionnaires de crédit, les membres du gouvernement, les membres du Parlement, les directeurs centraux. Cette obligation, c'est l'obligation de déclarer leur patrimoine avant l'entrée en fonction. Cette obligation de déclaration de patrimoine est un élément qui permet de voir est-ce que les fonds publics ne sont pas utilisés à des fins personnelles. Et cette déclaration de patrimoine, c'est la haute autorité pour la bonne gouvernance qui a cette responsabilité de recueillir les déclarations de patrimoine, de vérifier, de contrôler et de s'assurer qu'il n'y a pas de situation d'enrichissement illicite. Et à ce jour, nous sommes à près de 95% de taux de déclaration de patrimoine. Je vais m'arrêter là pour l'heure. Merci.
Thank you very much. Honorable Kello, you want to chip in? Because we agreed that we were going to have a conversation. Go ahead before
Yes.
I turn to Alvin.
Thank you, Robin. I want to thank Zoro for raising the issue of declaration of wealth. In Uganda, we also have that. Actually, it's currently going on. The deadline is 31st of this month. I've already done mine. Now, maybe the question I want to ask Zoro is whether this really works in the real sense. Yes, you can declare your wealth, but how does the government go further to make sure that Akello has actually declared exactly what is there? Because I can do it just superficially, just to meet the criteria for me to be nominated, because for us, they've said, if you don't declare, you won't be nominated for the next election. Okay. And I've already done it. So how in Cote d'Ivoire, or in any country, say Kenya, I'm very much interested in knowing how the governments go ahead and still vet to make sure that I've actually declared everything and I have not stolen from the public coffers.
All right. I'll take note of that question, and when we do the Q&A, I'll come back to it, because I want Alvin now to try and tie it up, because you have a bird's eye view. It's not about a specific country. Yeah. What, in your view, is the impact of the current global financial architecture on financial integrity and transparency?
Thank you very much, Ruben, and I'd like to appreciate the OGP for this invitation. I think that when we talk of the global financial architecture, it's important to recognize that there is a system that has existed over the last 50 years that has a direct bearing on some of the questions we are discussing at the national level. To take an example, the cost of borrowing, which I think Lucy gave an example of China and the US. The global financial system is characterized in a way that there's a huge underrepresentation of borrower countries. There's a power skew in the sense that, for example, the determination of risk, which has a bearing on the interest rates that these countries access credit, is largely determined by 4 companies that are all largely American. So I think that there is here, the first question here is, how does Africa as a continent at a regional level strengthen its agency? And here there have been attempts, for example, by the creation of the Africa Credit Rating Agency to try and address this bias that has a direct bearing on the impact or the level of credit, but also the risk assessment that African countries and indeed borrower countries are exposed to. There equally have been attempts to try and solidify the agency of borrower countries by creating a borrowers club, and I think this is something again which is I think really important. So I think the first point I want really to make is that as much as we are focusing on the challenges at the national level, it's important to recognize that there is a structure at the global level that is severely undermining the capacity and ability of countries in the global south to access credit in a manner that is fair and equitable, and this challenge needs to be addressed not only on the debt side, but also on the tax side, because one of the reasons why our countries, of course, the debt ratio, the debt levels are increasing is because the capacity of our countries to mobilize domestic resource mobilization is equally severely undermined by the same global financial system that is facilitating significant leakages through illicit financial flows, a subject that, again, in my previous life, I've engaged significantly. So in a summary, Chair, I think that as we have this conversation, it's really important to have this global lens of looking at how can we strengthen Africa's agency in addressing the outdated, in my view, an outdated global financial architecture that is undermining the capacity of African countries to either mobilize their own domestic resources or also access credit at a fair rate. Then, of course, we can come down and now start speaking about what that means at the national level, including the question of debt transparency and how, for example, this is contributing to increasing the cost of debt. Just give an example. Yes, thank you. African countries, in average, and indeed global, the countries of the global south, the average debt interest rate is about 10%. For the developed economies, is 2 to 3%. So you have a paradox there that the countries that actually need the resources are borrowing at a much higher interest rate than the countries of the global south, simply because of how their risk has been assessed. And who's doing this risk assessment? The same countries or organizations that are based in the global north. So if we don't address that, I think we'll be caught in this kind of rat race of having to make choices, very tough choices of are we borrowing from the Chinese, the question that Honorable Lucy spoke very, very strongly about.
Great. Thank you very much. Like I promised, I would like to turn to the audience on this foundational question before we have a second round of questions and interventions from the panelists. So are there any questions, comments on how the global financial architecture, the way it's currently structured, is having an impact on financial integrity and financial transparency in our countries? Any comment, reaction? I know it's still early in the morning, but Anne, you want to go first? I've seen a hand here, and then I'll come to you. Let me take these two. So, Madame, go ahead. Just introduce yourself.
Okay. My name is Anne Mbewe-Namela, and I'm from Zambia, currently chairperson of the CSO Alliance on OGP, and then also heading an organization that is an umbrella network for all civil society organizations, NGOs, and FPOs that focus on gender equity and equality. It's good to hear the different perspectives from the panelists. But I'm hoping that as we get into this discussion further and look at the actual impact of debt, we will consider the differentiated impacts on different groups, different groupings at country level. For example, for us that focus on gender, we look at the impact of debt on women and girls. I think somebody spoke about the ways the social sector funding suffers, when the country has debt obligations. For example, if you look at women and girls or women, we might look at the impact of spending in the health sector. Countries fail even to meet some of the regional obligations, like the budget declaration that calls for at least a 15% expenditure of the total budget on health. And what's the impact of that, for example, on maternal and child health, mortality? So I think it would be good that while we look at debts at that higher level, we also need to interrogate what that means for the different groups, in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure the panelists will respond to this. There's a gentleman here, and then Madame, you'll be... Okay, I've seen two hands, and then we can conclude. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So, my name is Samuel James Pator. I come from Liberia. I represent the Federation of Liberian Youth and currently serving as an ambassador of the Youth Democracy Cohort here at the OGP. Not many times young people are given the platform and allowed to come to these sort of meetings, but thankfully we're in the room and we're happy to be here. I'm very happy to hear the different perspectives from the different countries and based on the different areas of expertise. And you will also note that according to the Department of Economic Affairs at the AUC, Africa loses about $390+ billion to illicit financial flows. Now, despite the fact that our governments in our respective countries are making huge commitments towards fiscal transparency measures that they're taking in countries, is it that there's something that's not just working right? Because despite the years that have passed and the commitments that we've made and the conversations and the meetings that we've come to, it keeps getting worse. It's not getting any better. So is it that something is not working? Is it that the literature is not being understood? Is it that our governments are just doing this to check the box and access some of these loans? What can Africa do differently? What can our governments do differently, and what role do you think CSOs can play? Because we're talking about it, we're in this conversation, we're in another meeting again, and next year we'll be in another meeting talking about the same thing. So what aren't we doing right? Great.
All right. The young man thinks talking is an industry in Africa. Madam?
Yeah, thank you very much. Our master of ceremonies for the panel. Sarah Birete, I come from Uganda, civil society in Uganda, and I'm happy to see our representative on the panel. My question goes to all panelists. It's not the question of discussing public debt or sources of giving our countries debt. I think what we need to tackle, or the elephant in the room, is fiscal indiscipline in our countries. For example, the skyrocketing public debt in most of our member states. Do we have value for this money as citizens? Can we take stock of what debt has contributed to the development of Africa? And can we also take stock of what we lose as taxpayers to corruption in each of our countries? And you would find that if we closed the taps for corruption, then we would not need to borrow so much money that have burdened the citizens of Africa and cannot enable fundamental development in our countries. So how do we solve this question?
All right. I was worried that someone would touch on corruption. When you mentioned that word, I almost started dancing, but let's get the gentleman to ask his question, and then we can turn to the panelists.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Andrew Songa from Kenya. I just have a brief question to Alvin regarding the Malabo Protocol and its provisions on corporate criminal liability. I just have a simple question from your assessment. What are the prospects of us seeing that protocol come into force within this decade? What would it take to operationalize the Malabo Protocol?
Great. Let me turn to the panelists. Alvin, you'll be the first. Deal with your question, the Malabo Protocol, and any other of the questions raised.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be to run through some of the questions. I think the first question that was asked about gender, I think this is really a very important question. There is this what is called the trilemma that severely constrains or limits fiscal space. So fiscal space, of course, we are talking not only on the debt side, but we're also talking on the tax side. One is when you look at the collection, revenue collection at the national level, and ask yourself, what are the kind of constraints that are government facing, and in terms of when they are making policies on how to collect, on from who to collect, do they have the right data? And here I'm specifically speaking about gender disaggregated data. Many a times across the continent, this does not exist. So policies are made, and then we find ourselves playing catch-up. Little analysis done on what are the impact of consumption taxes. To give an example, across Africa, you find that consumption taxes make up of about 40% of the total revenue collection. But little analysis is done on that piece of policy on are we collecting gender disaggregated data that helps us make the right policy choices on the kind of tax policies that we want to put in place in terms of its impact on specific sectors or specific sectors of society, including women. The same applies to the allocation. Not only once you have collected the revenue, what instruments do you have to decide on the allocation component? Because once the revenue has been collected, how it's then allocated across either the regional and sub-regional level, across different sectors on health and education. Again, here I think data becomes a very critical component, and equally the same on the expenditure side. On the question that was asked on illicit financial flows, and I'll try to be very brief. I think there are four things here that I think are very important. One, of course, the progress seems to be very slow, but I think that we are making some headway, at least at the global level. The ongoing conversations on the reforms of the international tax architecture, which the African countries have played a critical role. The UN Tax Convention process, which many of you are aware is underway, I think provides a significant opportunity to actually undo some of the harms I mentioned earlier about Africa's voice, about the question of how do we ensure that the hemorrhaging of resources through illicit financial flows is addressed at that global level. But there is also need to invest on the question of capacity, on the question of legal framework, and I think here I would like to hear much more from Honorable Lucy about the role of parliamentarians in terms of legislating the right policies at the domestic level that can contribute to sealing some of the loopholes that facilitate revenue leakage. And of course, harmonization of policies at regional level. You find that many a times our countries are caught in what you can call a race to the bottom. In the effort to attract investments, countries are providing significant incentives, fiscal incentives, tax incentives to be able to attract investment, and what is that is resulting to is a significant erosion of the tax base. On the corruption question, Ruben, I know you're a moderator, but I think I'll put your task to tackle that question. On the Malabo Protocol, I think that really beyond just the Malabo Protocol, we are not short of policy instruments. The continent is a plethora of instruments and policies. Each major conference that is organized, there's an outcome document. There are commitments at the global level. What we lack, in my own opinion, is the political will. And this is really the elephant in the room. But how do you manufacture that? And I think here OGP has a very critical role in terms of the platform this multi-stakeholder platform that has been created to try and bring the different lenses to this question, provides that possibility of manufacturing political will. It's not really, I do get very skeptical about any time there's a new process that comes and leads to a great declaration, a new protocol that emerges, but 5 years later we find ourselves again in the same space, or even worse, us making steps backward. If you look at what the US did very recently, there's a lot of investment that have been put on the beneficial ownership. And you just need one political decision, and then 10 years of work has been undone. So I think that there's really need to have this conversation about the importance of, I would call it in simple way, manufacturing consent and manufacturing political will to implement some of these policies.
Thanks, Alvin. Thanks, Alvin. Just kindly switch off the mic, and I encourage my panelists to switch off the mic when you're not speaking, because there's a bit of interference with the translation. But Karen, you want to respond to some of the questions? Okay. We still have the issue of, what are we not doing right? We keep talking, we keep having all these conversations, and the problem gets worse.
So allow me to touch on the question of gender data. And I think that is really important, because for a long time we've looked at, a broad overview on the issues of debt transparency. But increasingly, especially given the recognition of the impact that high debt payment is having on public service delivery, we are then going granular to see the impact on this. And I did say earlier, for example, the issues of the social protection, health, education, sanitation. And for countries, like us in the region, where 70 to 80% of any revenue raised is going to paying public debt, and perhaps 25% of that going to recurrent, it means you're only leaving like 5% for development, which means that either the citizens suffer or external sources have to be used to fill that. But the challenge then is compounded by the issue of corruption, that even where development partners and the multilateral lenders then step in to address these issues of service delivery, the question of corruption, like has been rightfully put, has not been addressed. And I do agree with Alvin that it's not the issue of laws, because we have a lot of those laws. And sometimes a question we grapple with is, can you legislate morality? Because to some extent, the problems we face are moral and not legal, and not, they could be moral and ethical. Why do I say that? Yesterday we were in a meeting, and one of our top leadership was quoting figures that have been raised before about how Kenya loses, for example, 2 billion to corruption every day, 365 Kenyan shillings, 365 billion per year, 700 plus per year to corruption. And the question was, what if we reduce that, even to 1 billion, still just 1 billion, and put the other billion for services? And we're challenging him and saying, why not do away with stealing altogether? So there's the issue of bad political hygiene, if you ask me, not the laws. And that needs to be addressed. The other one is, of course, the weak enforcement mechanisms that we talked about, parliamentary oversight, but you see that a lot of the independent institutions are increasingly undermined across the region, so they can't play their enforcement laws, whether you're looking at the issues of illicit finance, corruption, and all that. And so as civil society organizations, I think the onus still remains on us to keep pushing the envelope, to keep pushing to ensure that governments are doing what needs to be done to address some of these issues, but also advocacy campaigns around behavior change that addresses some of the underlying issues that laws might exist and cannot address. Lastly, let me touch also on the question that was raised earlier around wealth declaration, because that sometimes is pushed as a solution. But we see that it's not, because yes, you declare wealth as you're coming in, we can't verify that source of wealth. And here there's been cases where people are saying, look, that's too much money. Does it really exist, or is it that you're planning to steal that money within your term of office, so that should we come back to you at the end of your term, then you'll be telling us, look, I started at this level, and so this additional amount is what I have raised. Unfortunately, too, unless you are reappointed to another position at the end of your term, we have no way of again coming back to say that this is where you started, this is how you end it. So we don't know how much has been accumulated in between. Lastly, these wealth declarations, at least in our case, are not open to the public. You need some legal justification for getting the wealth declarations. So other than what you tell us, we don't have a way of knowing what you have filed and what you're filing each year. I don't know whether that's the case in Uganda. Mheshimiwa will tell us. And then lastly, the issue of service delivery, just looking at it from the tax perspective, the cost of living perspective, and how this continues to then weaken the same issues that already the public debt, because you then need to raise, Alvin has talked about domestic resource mobilization, but how is this being done? You're going after the same people for taxation, the same people that you're not providing services to. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Very important points. Mr. Zoro, you could answer any of the questions that have been raised?
Oui, merci pour toutes ces questions, vos interventions. Je voudrais revenir, avant d'aborder la question de la déclaration de patrimoine, je voudrais faire quelques commentaires sur la question de l'endettement. Peut-être ce qui se pose comme problème, ce n'est pas l'endettement en soi, parce que vous êtes d'accord avec moi qu'on ne peut pas faire le développement, même à titre individuel, pas faire d'investissement sans endettement, sans s'endetter. C'est valable pour tous les pays. Ici, quelles sont les conditions? La question qui se pose à nos États, c'est à quelles conditions nous nous endettons et qu'est-ce que nous faisons de ces emprunts? Pour répondre à la question, l'enjeu, c'est le taux des emprunts que nous faisons. Le Fonds monétaire international ou la Banque mondiale intervient, peut avoir les mêmes règles pour tous les pays, mais ça peut changer. Lorsque un prêteur vient dans un pays imprévisible, où il n'y a pas de transparence budgétaire, il n'y a pas de système de recours, ce n'est pas les mêmes conditions qu'il va poser lorsqu'il va dans un pays où les règles sont prévisibles, où il y a l'état de droit, où il y a des voies de recours. Notre expérience est que le taux auquel nous empruntons n'est pas le même en fonction de la mesure des risques de corruption. Je prends le cas de la Côte d'Ivoire. En 2011-2012, sur l'échelle de mesure de la corruption, la Côte d'Ivoire était 136e sur 180 pays à travers le monde, à partir des mesures de l'outil de transparence internationale. Nous étions à 136e sur 180 pays à travers le monde. Il était difficile, avec ce rang-là, d'attirer les investisseurs. Il était difficile d'aller sur le marché financier international pour mobiliser des ressources à un taux acceptable. Et c'est pour ça que des réformes ont été initiées, des réformes ont été engagées. Aujourd'hui, en 2024, nous sommes 69e sur 180 pays à travers le monde et nous avons constaté que c'est plus facile, ça rassure les investisseurs, ça rassure les bailleurs de fonds à faire des emprunts à des taux acceptables. Parce que les conditionnalités qui sont demandées, c'est quoi? Est-ce qu'en cas de corruption, il y a des voies de recours? Est-ce que l'environnement des affaires est assaini? Est-ce que les finances publiques sont transparentes? Est-ce que les citoyens sont engagés? Est-ce qu'il y a des organismes de contrôle? Donc, c'est des efforts qui sont en train d'être faits. C'est vrai qu'il y a encore énormément de choses à faire, mais ce que je voulais dire, c'est que le grand enjeu, c'est renforcer la démocratie dans nos États. Le grand enjeu, c'est de renforcer la participation citoyenne. Le grand enjeu, c'est l'indépendance des juridictions de contrôle, des instances de contrôle, pour nous permettre donc de bénéficier des emprunts à des taux acceptables et surtout de faire en sorte que les dettes servent à investir dans le développement et non pas à enrichir des individus. Et sur la question de l'enrichissement des individus, je vais intervenir sur la question de la déclaration de patrimoine. Parce qu'effectivement, c'est ceux qui sont à la manette pour faire des emprunts, pour gérer les crédits, pour gérer les finances publiques, qui sont soumis à la question de déclaration de patrimoine, je le disais, pour s'assurer que les fonds publics, les ressources issues de l'endettement ne servent pas à des individus, mais servent plutôt à l'intérêt général. La question n'est pas simple. Nous sommes, à notre expérience, ça ne date pas encore de 10 ans. La question n'est pas simple. L'un des défis que nous avons sur la question de la gestion des déclarations de patrimoine, c'est le défi de la digitalisation. Nous ne sommes pas dans un système de digitalisation intégrée. Déjà, en termes d'expérience de la haute autorité, nous avons commencé. Les assujettis, c'est des acteurs du pouvoir. C'est des acteurs qui disposent de l'autorité. Et donc, c'est difficile pour eux, c'était difficile pour ces acteurs-là au départ, de venir déclarer leur patrimoine. C'est les ministres, c'est les premiers ministres, c'est les parlementaires et autres. C'était difficile. Il y a eu beaucoup d'actions de sensibilisation qui ont été conduites, qui ont été menées. Au-delà des actions de sensibilisation, à un moment donné, depuis 2 ans, nous avons utilisé la voie de la coercition. Parce que la loi dit, lorsque tu ne déclares pas ton patrimoine, tu as 3 mois pour déclarer ton patrimoine. Quand tu ne déclares pas ton patrimoine, tu reçois un exploit de commissaire de justice et après l'exploit de commissaire de justice, c'est l'action judiciaire. Pour celui qui n'a pas déclaré son patrimoine, la peine, c'est 6 mois d'amende équivalent, c'est une amende équivalent à 6 mois de rémunération. Alors, depuis 2 ans, nous engageons des actions en ce sens-là. Nous avons commis des huissiers, qu'ils soient membres du gouvernement, membres du Parlement, quelle que soit la position qu'ils occupent, ils reçoivent des exploits du commissaire de justice, des interpellations. Nous avons même traduit quelques personnes assujetties devant les tribunaux pour non-déclaration de patrimoine. Malheureusement, à cette date, nous n'avons pas encore de condamnation. Nous espérons en avoir. Et c'est pour ça que nous avons également besoin de l'accompagnement, du soutien des médias, de la pression de l'opinion publique pour que des sanctions soient prises contre les récalcitrants. L'autre chose que nous avons initiée maintenant, c'est la vérification de la sincérité des déclarations de patrimoine. Et là, c'est un vrai défi, parce que c'est plusieurs administrations qui sont en jeu. L'administration des transports pour voir est-ce que les véhicules déclarés, les systèmes bancaires, combien il y a dans le compte, combien il y avait. Donc, c'est assez fastidieux en termes de vérification. Nous avons près de 10 000 assujettis. Et nous avons entamé les systèmes de vérification des déclarations de patrimoine. C'est lentement, mais c'est sûrement que nous avançons en matière de transparence dans la gestion des finances publiques, vu sous l'angle de la déclaration de patrimoine. Ce n'est pas simple, mais nous continuons d'agir. Merci.
Great. I know it's a big topic on its own. We would need another panel. Maybe we'll talk to the CEO. We can remain on Friday tomorrow and continue. But Honorable Akello, briefly, because I'm interested to go to the second part of this session.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Maybe just briefly about the gender issue that Anne raised. Oftentimes, when we are borrowing this money, I don't know how many of our women are involved in the decision-making. Usually, it starts from up, and then it comes to the woman as the end user. And we find that many of the markets are not prioritized, and maybe if the hospitals are built, then they are not taking care of the women's needs. I want to give an example. In Uganda, we passed a loan to build a hospital. And unfortunately, as Parliament, as part of our role is to monitor the implementation of the money. I can assure you that we were denied access to this facility because they said we have no business in that. And my sister Sarah can bear me witness. About the declaration, I want to give a very live example from Uganda. Actually, a member of parliament lost his seat for failure to declare his wealth. And he really lost his seat. And because of that, now we see many people declaring. But now the question is it enough to declare? And that is why in Uganda there's a big discussion around maybe we could go for what we call lifestyle audit. How do you live your day-to-day life compared to what you have declared? And then we really don't lack laws, just like Alvin has said. It's just a political will. When loans come to us as members of parliament, you are fixed. You are actually fixed on the wall. For example, they will tell you there's a loan, and they say, if you reject this, but there is a road in Amuru, if you reject it, we are going to go to Amuru and tell the people of Amuru that you rejected this loan simply because you think we have overborrowed. And then at the end of the day, you say, okay, now let me approve it anyway. After all, it's coming to my place, and it's going to benefit my people. And finally, I want to talk about, maybe briefly about commitments and then corruption. In Uganda, Parliament, we developed what we call a readiness filter checklist. This checklist looks at what is it that must be ready before you borrow. For example, environmental impact assessment, has it been done? The compensation of land, is the land available? And all these things, are you ready? In other words, are you ready to borrow? So once the boxes have been ticked, then it is very easy for you now to say, okay, there's no reason why you should not approve this loan. Unfortunately, in real life, this is not what happens. They will tell you, we have done the environmental impact assessment, we have done the compensation to the people in case of maybe road construction, but the reality on the ground will be that none of that has been done. And it will take another 2 years for all this to be done. And remember, every time and minute wasted, we are going to pay interest on this loan. And that is how we end up losing a lot of money as opposed to the money which would have gone to really help. And this is by the part of the corruption, because they use that to actually buy more time and even pay money which is not supposed to be paid. So that is how corruption is actually happening in the case of Uganda. I don't know about other countries, but this is what we have seen, that they even use contractors to make money out of this. Well, the issue of corruption is a big thing, and it starts with you and I. It starts with you and I. For us to fight corruption, it's not enough to legislate, but it's about all of us doing something in our little ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Kelo. You talk about wealth declaration, and I think Caro put this very clearly. In Transparency International circles, we now talk about advanced declarations. So I'm only worth 1 million, but I declare 20 million. So if I steal, I have a float of 19 million to catch up. So the fact that there is very poor verification of the declaration is why we have this challenge. But in other countries like Zambia, we now have a new challenge. Public officials using family trusts. So I put all my assets in a family trust. So what do I declare? I can't declare the family trust. I say I only have 2 guns and 1 car, but I have 10, 13 houses under the family trust. So we have to also look at those challenges. But I want to start with you for the second round, Honorable Kelo. You kind of talked about some of the challenges that you face as a parliament. But the World Bank Public Debt Heatmap considers Uganda as doing well in terms of public debt and debt management transparency compared to other sub-Saharan countries. I know you look shocked, but that's the World Bank report. I wanted to find out, in your view, how can open government approaches support the role of Parliament in strengthening debt transparency action?
Thank you very much. Well, if we are doing well, then, well, I congratulate us. But yes, yeah, truly, and I'm saying this really because I love my country very much, and I want to see things done well. When I joined Parliament in 2014 in a by-election, I joined the committee, accountability committee of the local government accounts committee. And I remember how we had a lot of support from the civil society organization. You know, the requirement for being a member of parliament in Uganda is S6. That is, I don't know what grade that is, but that is just before you join university. Maybe if I can describe it like that. As long as you have that certificate, you're good to go. You can join parliament. And because of that, there's actually a lot of gaps in the information, knowledge, and all that, and also how you scrutinize issues and policies. So we had very many organizations, civil society organizations, working with Parliament, supporting Parliament in terms of research and information. Unfortunately, this has really, really gone down. I don't see many of the civil society now coming in to support. They are there, but not as many as before. And unfortunately, as a country, we haven't met, all the boxes are not yet ticked. We would have loved to be part of OGP as a country. And Sarah, this is work in progress for us as a country. Because I've reliably informed that we are not part of this because of our work with civil society, how we have stifled the environment and the work environment for civil society in Uganda. And I pray that this works out, even as we are doing very well with transparency, according to World Bank. I wish we also do better in terms of how we work with civil society, because I know they can actually support Parliament a lot in doing this. And secondly, I talked about the filters that we have. And much as the civil society space has been, has dwindled, the citizens of Uganda have actually taken the issues in their hands. And that is why they keep reminding us of our role. I remember there was an exhibition of, you're talking of declaration, we earlier talked of declaration, but we had a very, I think the most powerful exhibition by the citizens using social media, how they declared our wealth, whether we liked or not. And they showed what each of us has, and it was everywhere. You couldn't run away from it. So that brought out what Parliament is, and it made us to get serious, a little serious, I must say. So for me, in a nutshell, I encourage more of the cooperation with civil society, because I know they have a lot to actually provide for our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. CSO engagement, very important, and OGP provides you that template of co-creating with CSOs. Mr. Zoro, your institution, the High Authority for Good Governance, is considered one of the critical institutions established by the government of the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire to combat corruption. Through your institution, Cote d'Ivoire has become a leading Francophone country in mainstreaming open government principles across different state entities. Can you share with us how, in your country context, you've used open government approaches to mitigate corruption risks and promote fiscal transparency?
Oui, sur la question de la transparence fiscale à travers l'utilisation des principes du gouvernement ouvert, je voudrais simplement revenir sur la loi de finances sur la transparence qui oblige le gouvernement à associer étroitement les organisations dans l'élaboration du budget de l'État et qui oblige également l'État de Côte d'Ivoire à associer les organisations de la société civile, notamment à travers les débats publics, les débats ouverts qui sont organisés autour de l'adoption des différents budgets de l'État. Ce que je voudrais dire sur l'implication des organisations de la société civile dans tout le processus de développement, je veux prendre juste quelques exemples d'outils de planification. C'est en 2015 que la Côte d'Ivoire a renoué avec la question de la planification quinquennale de son développement, avec des plans nationaux de développement tous les 5 ans. Mais pour accompagner ce plan national de développement, la Côte d'Ivoire s'est dit qu'il faut mobiliser beaucoup de ressources. Et pour mobiliser ces ressources, il y a des conditions de transparence et d'efficacité gouvernementale qu'il faut respecter. Nous avions besoin d'outils pour pouvoir respecter ces conditions et l'adhésion à l'OGP, qui date également de 2015, est partie intégrante des outils de mise en place de notre planification de développement qui suppose également mobiliser des ressources pour engager le développement. Et sur ce point, je voudrais prendre le modèle d'engagement dans lequel nous sommes à travers le Millennium Challenge Corporation. C'est une espèce de contrat. Vous voulez de l'argent pour construire des hôpitaux, pour construire des écoles, il y a une organisation tripartite, multipartite qui est mise en place entre les bailleurs des fonds, mais également au niveau national, entre toutes les parties prenantes, y compris la plateforme OGP nationale, qui est partie intégrante de l'instrument de gouvernance de ce financement. Alors, en fonction des critères qui sont élaborés tous les ans pour accéder à ces financements, il y a les critères de démocratie, les critères d'état de droit, les critères de participation citoyenne, les critères de voie de recours. Et donc c'est une pression qui est mise, que le gouvernement met sur elle-même pour assurer une bonne gestion efficace des ressources qui sont allouées. De sorte que dans le cadre de cette organisation multipartite, on évalue tous les ans. Nous avons bénéficié de 200 millions de dollars pour construire une route. Est-ce que la route a été construite? Pour faire des écoles de proximité, est-ce que tout ceci a été fait? Donc, je prends ces exemples concrets pour dire comment, au plus haut sommet décisionnel, au niveau de la volonté politique, il y a une réelle volonté politique, et c'est vraiment de façon concrète que, à toutes les étapes de la planification de développement, à toutes les étapes de la mobilisation des ressources internes, y compris à travers les ressources fiscales, les impôts et les différentes taxes, comment la question les principes de transparence, les principes de participation citoyenne, les principes d'organisation de voies de recours en cas de contestation, en cas de malutilisation des ressources, comment nous essayons d'organiser. Encore une fois, je dis, ce n'est pas parfait, mais il y a une volonté, il y a un cadre qui est mis en place et il y a des actions concrètes. Nous espérons aller plus loin avec l'accompagnement du principe du gouvernement ouvert. Nous espérons aller plus loin, notamment à travers les engagements et les défis que nous avons pris pour les 5 prochaines années avec l'OGP. Merci.
Thank you very much, sir. Carol, let me turn to you. Mzalendo Trust has historically played an important role in strengthening transparency and monitoring accountability, and also following up on corruption matters that come before the Kenyan Parliament. And your work has been exemplary and inspiring for many reformers on the continent. So I wanted to get your views on what specific tools or platforms that can be created to strengthen civil society's role in debt transparency monitoring. And if there are any key lessons from the campaigns that you've undertaken, some of the key lessons that we can pick up for the rest of Africa and the Middle East regions.
Thank you. Thanks, Ruben. And from the onset, the Mzalendo is really has been anchored on enhancing openness and transparency, especially around parliamentary issues, but most importantly, ensuring that citizens have a voice, that they know, that they are informed, and they are not only informed, but they can also inform by giving their feedback on specific issues. So when it comes to the role in debt transparency, we are doing several things. One is research and generation of data. On the question of gender, for example, Mzalendo, in partnership with the two other partners in the room, we are currently undertaking research on the impact of public debt on gender, but with specific focus on different sectors that I had alluded to earlier. But we are also a civic tech platform. And one of the things we've been doing is creating different platforms that monitor, that track, and that inform on various issues. So in relation to this, we are currently at the, conceptualizing the development of a public debt tracker, similar, to Publish What You Borrow, that will focus on Kenya's debt. And this again is to help citizens have a voice on the issue of tracking, but also tracking the expenditure. What has been borrowed, and is it being used for what it was committed to? Secondly, civil society organizations play an agenda-setting role. And for us, we feel that especially when it comes to the issues of public debt, CSOs really brought that agenda to the national conversation. And courtesy of that, whether you are talking about the administration or the opposition, in their political campaigns in the last elections, they committed to taking certain measures to address the issue of public debt. And so it's in their manifestos. So another platform that we then created is what we call the Promise Tracker. You may have seen it being discussed on an Al Jazeera interview recently. But the thing is, walk the talk. So if you've made promises that you're going to address the issues of public debt, what measures are you putting in place? And we are tracking this. And we've been doing it, 100 days, 1 year, midterm. We shall do that. The third one is, of course, facilitating citizen engagement, so public conversations around the issues of public debt, the bills that are in parliament that relate to the issue. Do citizens know what the content of those bills is, and do they have a way of giving their voice? And then lastly is, of course, I did mention this earlier, around engagement with the parliamentary committees themselves, because we believe that informing policy also requires engagement. And this tied with that agenda-setting role then of ensuring that Kenya's current action plan now has a fiscal transparency commitment that was co-created by the different actors in the room, but also includes, Parliament as a key stakeholder and the executive as well. So just borrowing from the multi-sectoral approach of OGP, it's to then ensure that we are working together with the different stakeholders to ensure that the public debt discourse remains central to the governance issues. I think I've responded to the question.
Great. Thank you very much, Carol. Talking about the Promise Tracker, when I saw that on Al Jazeera, I thought you're just about to declare yourself running for public office, but now you've explained, I know the context.
I'm setting it this way.
Let me turn to you with your vast experience on tax justice issues. I'm interested to know what you believe is the responsibility of African multilateral institutions in ensuring better, more responsive, and fairer international development action arising from the global financial architecture, in order for us to address this destabilizing debt and climate vulnerability in Africa.
Thank you very much, Ruben. I think that listening to the conversation now, I think one of the key issues that is coming, that is emerging, that is cutting across the different country experiences is that when we talk about fiscal transparency, be it in the area of tax or in the debt, one common thing is that we have, across the continent, very convoluted reporting systems, where you have, we are measuring different things using different instruments, so it becomes very difficult, both from the sides of the citizens, from the sides of the lenders, and I think Zoro did speak about the cost of debt that is linked to the lack of available data on your actual debt infrastructure that you have. So how do we address this? I think, and what is the role specifically of the international community, and more specifically the multilateral development agencies? And here I think that there are 4 things I think which will be really, really important here to play. One is really the investment in institutions. Areas that we have seen success in terms of tackling all these questions we have been discussing about corruption, for example. The capacity of institutions to formulate policy, to regulate, to provide oversight and enforcement is all dependent on the institutional framework that exists. And what we see in many countries that you have a very variable kind of structure where some of the institutions that are very strong, but others are weak. You'd find that you have a very strong parliamentary oversight committees, but the anti-corruption bodies are not able to enforce that. So how do you actually invest deliberately in the strengthening institutional capacity across the broad spectrum that includes the oversight institutions, the parliamentary institutions, and other relevant actors? The second point is, and I think here we can't lose sight of the connecting tissues of the regional harmonization and cooperation. I think here, when it comes to the question of de-risking and de-risking debt and making debts more accessible and available, I think multilateral development banks have a critical role to play in terms of creating platforms for information exchange, for harmonization of policies at the regional level, even for peer learning and peer exchange. Thirdly, I think the question of data is a very critical one. And we made reference to that on the gender question, but I think this applies across board. Your decision, the viability of, or the impact or the outcomes of your decision is dependent on the data that informed that decision. Without that, I think that we'll be caught again in this kind of vicious race of making decisions and undoing those decisions. So really how much, and here I think OGP has a very, very critical role to play in terms of ensuring that both at the national but also at the regional level, the data question is addressed. Lastly, and this probably knows directly linked to the role of MDBs, but I think all this without an activated citizenry, we wouldn't move. And I think the work that, for example, Mzalendo is doing, another civil society organization, becomes really, really critical because that provides the bedrock. And we have seen in Kenya here, for those of you who saw the Gen Z demonstration as part of the finance bill, I think an activated citizenry is a very critical component of delivering both at the national level but also regionally a transparent fiscal architecture.
Thank you very much, Alvin. You talk about the Gen Z. We saw the demonstrations, and I was saying in my days as a youth, we were hunting birds. We were not demonstrating on the streets, so totally different environments. But let me turn very briefly to the audience. We have limited time. If there's a burning question, one or two, I would entertain those, and then, my goodness, I said one or two, and I have how many? If you promise me to be very brief, I'll start there very brief. Please don't make speeches, one, two, I'll take very brief comments.
Bon, bonjour à tous.
Thank you.
Oh, it's there.
Oh, okay.
Let's start there, then
Good,
I'll come to it.
yeah, good morning. My name is Kojo Asante. I work for the Center for Democratic Development, CDD, in Ghana. So, quickly on the debt issue, and really my contribution is about incentives. On the debt issue, debt is very, very attractive for political party or public officer because the benefit is immediately, it's instant, but you can postpone the pain, later. So we have to really look about incentives, how we design, restraints within the system. So deficit financing, for instance, if you say somebody should not pass a certain level, what do you do? What is the sanction that would incentivize? I also haven't heard about campaign financing, because that's also about incentives. If we don't stop the monetization of politics, it just makes it very, very difficult to have fiscal transparency. Thank you.
Thanks, Kojo. The gentleman here.
Okay. Bonjour à tous. Moi, je voulais un peu faire un plaidoyer pour toute l'Afrique centrale. Je vois depuis 2 jours la faible participation de l'Afrique centrale. Je ne sais pas, est-ce qu'il y a la délégation de l'Afrique centrale ici, en salle? L'Afrique centrale. Ok. C'est pour dire déjà que nous avons un vrai défi en Afrique centrale. Aujourd'hui, la jeunesse, je parle au nom de la jeunesse africaine parce que je fais partie de la délégation de la Youth Corps Démocratie. Aujourd'hui, nous avons compris que nous, la jeunesse, nous sommes exclus des transparences budgétaires. On ne nous met pas dans la suivi des allocations publiques. Nous sommes vraiment exclus. Et au Tchad, nous avons mis en place une plateforme qui s'appelle Nidoro Al-Nouafe. C'est une plateforme qui consiste à collecter les données GPS de besoins en eau potable. Actuellement, cette plateforme éduque la population sur la transparence budgétaire locaux. Nous travaillons avec les communes. C'est un travail qui est en train de faire depuis 2 ans. Nous avons eu le soutien de l'Union africaine, d'Afrique TV ici présent, et d'autres soutiens sont en cours. Mais maintenant, le problème, c'est que dans tout ce qu'on fait, nous sommes souvent confrontés à ce qu'on appelle la collaboration entre nos gouvernants et nous. Qu'est-ce qu'il faut faire? Vous qui avez déjà amorcé ces pas, qu'est-ce que vous avez mis en place pour arriver à ce niveau? Et vous devez impliquer les jeunes dans les audits numériques, les audits fiscaux. Aujourd'hui, la jeunesse aussi participe à l'impôt. Nous payons l'impôt parce qu'on travaille. On paye l'impôt, les citoyens payent l'impôt, mais on est souvent exclus. Pourquoi ça? Je vous remercie.
All right, thank you. I'll take one here and one at the end. Sorry, we are really running out of time. I've been told 10:40 we have to be out of this place. Sorry about that.
Alors, bonjour. Moi, je suis Sidi Bari. Je suis du Burkina Faso, le point de contact de l'OGP. J'ai 2 petites questions à adresser à M. Zoro, qui est de la Côte d'Ivoire, avec qui nous avons vraiment de fortes similitudes, en lien bien sûr avec les réformes mises en œuvre dans le cadre de l'OGP. Ma première question est relative en fait aux grands défis auxquels les acteurs de l'implémentation du budget programme sont confrontés. Moi-même qui vous parle, je suis responsable du programme budgétaire réforme de l'administration. J'aimerais bien savoir à son niveau, pour lui, quels sont les grands défis auxquels ces acteurs en charge de l'implémentation du budget programme sont confrontés. Deuxième question, c'est en lien avec la déclaration de patrimoine. C'est vrai qu'au Burkina Faso, dans le second plan d'action national, nous avons travaillé à travers un engagement à mettre en œuvre cette déclaration de patrimoine des assujettis. Nous sommes allés au-delà des politiques. Nous l'avons appelé ainsi des assujettis autres que les politiques. Aujourd'hui, au Burkina, nous avons pu dématérialiser le processus donc, de déclaration de patrimoine. En Côte d'Ivoire, qu'est-ce qui freine, qu'est-ce qui bloque, bien sûr, cette dématérialisation en ligne de la déclaration de patrimoine? Merci.
All right. And lastly, then I'll get the responses as part of your closing remarks.
Thank you. Tim Hansted from the Chandler Foundation. Quick question. The IMF conducts governance and corruption risk assessments and diagnostics, which become a key document, particularly when there's debt restructuring. How can OGP and all of us as open government champions use those documents to push fiscal transparency and integrity?
Okay, let's start with final remarks. I'll start with you, Honorable Lucy Akelo. Then Mr. Zoro, as you make your final remarks, you can also respond to the question. So if you want to take up any of the questions in your final remarks, please do that. I'm interested in what are the key takeaways? What do we take away from this discussion?
Thank you, Ruben, moderator. I want to thank OGP in my closing remark. Thank you so much. I know Uganda is not part of this, but I've participated in this forum now for this is my second time, and I want to thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. Yes. In my closing remark, I want to say that as Parliament, our role is oversight, but we are limited to the sometimes selective enforcement of the law. And for me, the takeaway is the physical transparency risk being a box-ticking exercise rather than a tool of accountability and service delivery. It is not enough to say, I have ticked this box, it's done and dusted, but how far do we go in ensuring that actually the monies reach the most vulnerable and the person who needs this money? Is not about ticking the boxes. Thank you so much, and have a blessed stay in Kenya, and those of us who are traveling, let's travel well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zoro?
Très bien. Une minute. Bon, on va essayer. Alors, l'ami Barry du Burkina Faso a posé la question des défis auxquels on est confronté au niveau de la gestion du budget programme. Je vais partager ma petite expérience. J'ai été ministre lorsque j'étais dans le gouvernement, lorsque ce programme était mis en place, et je vous dis que c'était une grande frustration pour les ministres, la question du budget programme. Parce que je suis ministre, je suis à la tête d'un département, mais ce n'est pas moi qui engage les crédits du département. Donc, alors qu'on était dans une culture administrative où c'est le ministre qui faisait tout. Alors, tu veux aller dans tel sens, le gestionnaire de crédit, il est directeur de service, il est directeur de cabinet, c'est lui, à la limite, en termes de gestion budgétaire, il a plus de pouvoir que toi en tant que ministre. Mais en réalité, tout ce qu'il fait, ça l'engage lui-même et ça t'engage. Donc, il y a un réel changement de culture administrative qu'il faut accepter, qu'il faut asseoir. Si bien que, vous le savez, des gestionnaires de programmes subissent beaucoup de pression de la part de leur hiérarchie, aller dans tel ou tel sens. Mais il faut s'en tenir au texte et au dispositif. La dernière chose que je voudrais ajouter, excusez-moi, en termes de leçons apprises, par rapport, ce n'est pas seulement pour la Côte d'Ivoire, lorsqu'on a mis en place les organes de gouvernance, de transparence, de contrôle et de lutte contre la corruption, au début de cette initiative, nous avons fait quelques missions de benchmarking et nous avons visité le Cap-Vert. Le conseil qui nous a été donné, vous pouvez aller sur la voie de la répression, vous pouvez aller sur la voie des sanctions. Ça peut être productif, ça peut être contre-productif. Allez, voici l'exemple, le modèle que nous avons suivi, la prévention, la modernisation de nos institutions et la digitalisation, avec comme bien-être du citoyen au cœur de notre approche. Donc l'une des solutions clés aujourd'hui, c'est la digitalisation des services. On parle de fiscal, on parle de fiscalité, on parle de suivi des programmes de développement, on parle de bien d'autres choses, d'accès aux services de base. La solution pour nous, l'une des solutions pour nous, c'est la digitalisation de nos services, de nos administrations, de notre administration fiscale. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zoro. Caroline, your final remarks?
Yeah. Allow me to start by responding to the young person from Chad to say that young people do actually have a role to play in this. Social accountability audits, you're the most technologically savvy. Use the technology to engage, to inform, to create awareness on issues of public debt. My final comment is really this. The OGP platform is the best platform that we have, given its co-creation, multi-sectoral approach to issues. And I do think that part of what we are doing here, you know, sharing information, learning, exchanging ideas, gives us a platform to learn from the best and to also know what not to take, what's working, what's not working. And then lastly is to say that we are operating in an era where technology has really given us opportunities. How do we use this knowledge to enhance transparency, accountability, and inclusion, ensure that the values that we espouse as OGP practitioners and reformers are replaced, not just in the civil society space, but also within the government agencies that we work with. So to say you're in the right place, the right time, and for the right moment. Thank you very much for engaging. Asante.
Thank you. Alvin, your final remarks, and I'm sure you take up the IMF-related question.
So, I would say that I think we have visions, we have plans, we have strategies, and in many of even the OGP spaces that I've attended, I think that we are not short of the solutions. The question is, how do we incentivize the correct behavior and disincentivize the behaviors that we don't want? And I think that for me is the question, and this connects to the question of the political will. Because including the IMF instruments, there are globally statistic instruments that enable countries to be able to report correctly on data, but those measures are not being implemented. The question is, why are they not being implemented? And our ability to respond to that question, I think, is the question I would throw back to the speakers, not really providing answers, but how do we actually incentivize the kind of behavior we want to see among our policymakers?
All right.
30 seconds, Ruben, on the IMF question, the diagnostic reports, to say that the lesson from Kenya is engage with the process, and currently as Kenya is going through a diagnostic assessment, civil society organizations